Welcome back for part two, all about the role of the CEO and how they should show up at leadership retreats. Let's jump back into it. Spending time with everyone at the retreat. Okay, so senior leaders usually, ideally, they're making it a point to, get that face time, spend time with everyone there. We talk to clients about, having productive meetings. What should a one-on-one look like? What should a skip manager meeting look like? What should a daily setup like? What for these conversations happening at the retreat, is it, enough? And is there merit and value to just having unstructured, the lighthearted chit chat? Or should the senior leaders, be more intentional to look and steer the conversation to gather certain information? Like, is there a right or wrong way to approach those conversations?
I think that it depends on every senior leader and every person who they're interacting with. Because in some cases, somebody who's new, let's say we're like I've seen this, we're doing a board education day or we're doing retreat and somebody's new, right? And so the conversation usually at the very beginning is learning a little bit more about the person, building on the relationship, etc. If somebody's a little bit more seasoned, somebody's a veteran, then it might be a very specific conversation. If it's a personal one, it might be actually very deeply personal. A child or parent who's ill, right? If it's professional, it's hey, what actually happened with that deal or with the negotiation with whatever it happens to be. What's the real scoop, right? And it might be that kind as well. But I think the beauty of these retreats, particularly for the leader, is that it's not just a question of operational excellence and strategy and all that kind of stuff. It's a chance to, because you're physically in the same place, it's a chance for you to actually build relationships, right? Because the relationships will endure very, very deeply for many, many years. Um, One of the things I think is very important is that there's some degree of social interaction that's based on it, whether it's a dinner beforehand or that, or I will say uh, there's only so many wine tours that any particular group can go on every single year. So there's all kinds of other ways of finding fun, interactive kind of things where people build relationships outside. But also point out that if indeed building stronger relationships between members of the organization is important, it also has to happen within the context of the agenda itself. How much of it is small group sessions where people can actually build relationships in a professional context, right? Because that's an important part of it. And then thank you if the fun activity is hikes in pairs or groups of three or something like that. Guess what they're going to talk about? They're going to talk about themselves, but they'll also talk about the stuff that they did in the group just an hour or two earlier, right? And so I think it's most CEOs are acutely sensitive to getting the best out of everybody. And everybody is different, and everybody kind of needs something a little bit different. And this is your opportunity to discover what that is to a higher level.
I'll ask another question on the same vein. Everyone, including senior leaders, have their work besties, their inner circle, of who their friends at work are, but also their sort of, the more influential people will sort of hover together or people in different departments. It's only natural for people, who feel close to each other to gravitate to each other. Um, I see this in all the retreats we go to, should a senior leader, avoid those sort of appearances and like tell the group disperse, like mingle around, or is it unavoidable and it's maybe healthy and good for people to see those clusters and see who's, making themselves sit at different tables or be part of different conversations?
So I think part of the reason why you're curating where people are sitting and what groups they're in, et cetera, is to help build relationships across the silos or across the jurisdictions or across the geographies, whatever. So that hopefully when it comes time for some of the coffee chats that people have or the social stuff in the evening, that then people who are not as tight will feel comfortable actually doing that kind of thing, right? So I think that that's part of that. But a certain game that I've always played in my mind anyway is to watch the CEOs, and the better ones all do this, to watch them as they sort of sprinkle their pixie dust everywhere. They go around and make sure they spend time with every single person, right? If it's dinner, they'll change their place several times, the appetizer here, the main course there, the dessert there, etc. If there's a social event after the dinner or before the dinner, they'll make sure that they're spending time with pretty much every single person. Okay, I think sometimes the CEO, if there's somebody who's new, what they'll do is they'll bring that new person along and say, I wanted to introduce you personally to so and so. You probably have a lot more in common than you realize. And just given that you were able to be the host and introduce some people, that's also something that's very important. Now, as retreat facilitators, I'm thinking just a couple weeks when we were um, in call it across the country, doing this. I think the better leaders will also use the retreat facilitators in a more holistic way. And here's what I mean. In this particular case, we said to the CEO, are there one or two members of your senior leadership team, set the C-suite, that might benefit from some coaching, some special coaching, a 1 hour sort of focus coaching session on helping them address whatever their challenges are. And the answer was yes, absolutely. This person, here's the issue here, here's the issue there. Let's see what they bring up and let's see sort of how that goes forward. Okay, so that's one thing because as a facilitator, you kind of learn something afterwards. Okay, actually, within those, 1, 2, 3 day retreats, the question that we would ask the CEO is, are there any people within the group that you want us to spend some time with, some extra time with? And not in a contrived, formal way, but something if everyone's sitting or at the bar having a drink, okay, and one of us can spend some time, hey, just wanted to know what you thought of the day, and then you end up having this wonderful conversation where usually that person will have a bunch of challenges or some ideas, and you're able to talk through them, etc. And that means that the actual impact of the time away is much better. And that individual person has got that extra bit of attention, right? And it's fun for us too. But how can you just do a retreat where, as a facilitator, you show up at 9, at 4 o'clock, thank you very much, we're done, and out you go. It just does not work that way. We're people too. We crave the connection with others, and when people have questions, particularly when we're on site, it's something that's very important. And so the CEO's role in that particular case is to identify that and make sure, frankly, that if you're working with a retreat facilitator, this is the kind of thing that they do as a matter of course.
I want to talk about a scenario where someone in the room is perhaps out of line a little bit. If they're saying something in the group or they're behaving in a way that's not productive, we'll say, okay? So is it appropriate or inappropriate? Like how should the CEO in the situation, they'd have a paid facilitator. So this is a good question. Like maybe where does our job begin and end versus theirs, or what happens before and after? I got guidelines a long time ago, which I sort of appreciate thinking about, which is if something happens behind, like privately, like behind closed doors, you can resolve that or address that behind closed doors. But if something is said or done in front of a group, and it's lies and it passes, then the damage is done, the impact is made, and the message that this behavior is tolerated. And I'm not talking about huge infringements where we're getting HR, but like these like micro, it affects the culture. Like, do you think the CEO needs to let it pass, or like speak to it? That's not how we do things. Like, you're a very diplomatic person, Randall, so I'll appreciate hearing your input.
So I've seen this in several cases, and it's so hard as an outsider because you don't know kind of really the culture inside. You don't know how many conversations the CEO may have had with this particular person. This particular person's comments might have been, 1,000 times better than they used to be last year at this time. We just don't know. We just don't know. So number one, if something was blowing up right away, like blowing up, what I would do as a facilitator, I've never had this happen, actually. I've never had this happen. But if it were blowing up, I would say, you know what? Why don't we take a 15-minute break? Okay, obviously this is a very heated, emotional topic. I think we need to talk about the underlying issues. Just let's take 15 minutes. We could just all consider some of the points that were made, and then let's reconvene. Okay, so if it were to blow up like crazy, okay, maybe that's kind of the firewall that you put in place. Then you have a chance of a reset. Well, what usually happens though is that if somebody says something that that we're not in the position to call out. Okay. And by the way, sometimes the small things we're able to say things like, "I'm just curious. Is this something everybody agrees with?" Right? So we could throw it back to the room and everything. Um, we can go to the CEO and apologize for putting them on the spot and saying, "I'm wondering if this is something that you'd like to address," because they can help that way. In other cases, it's at the next break to pinhole the CEO and say, "Listen, there's something that happened last time. I don't know if you caught it, but we saw, we're just wondering whether this is something that needs to be addressed publicly, whether this is something that you want to talk to, or that you want that person who was exhibiting that bad behavior just to put up their hand and apologize." I said, I don't know what the your suggestion, or is this something that we should just let slide and you'll deal with later? And all these things are possible. I know that when somebody's got, when somebody's doing whatever the antics are, sometimes it's very, very frustrating. We've been in situations where people can't sit. Okay, they can't sit for more than 10 minutes before they've got to just get up and move. And so all of a sudden, if you got a whole bunch of people up and moving and you've got the rest of the group sitting, it's almost it's very distracting, very, very distracting for the people in the room. And we could figure it out, but it's just distracting. But if that's the case, then and if we knew that that was the case for a number of them, maybe what we could have done is we could have structured the types of activities where people are doing a lot more movement and a lot less sitting, right? I think it's challenging because people are people. They're not just leadership robots, right? And to be able to keep your eye on what's our end goal here is probably more important than anything. If the goal, for example, is to deal with some amazing new strategic opportunity and kind of figure it out. If it's a not-for-profit, for example, where you've got some staff and oftentimes they're overworked and under-resourced, and you've got a whole bunch of volunteers and you've got the board of directors and you've got some legacy members, there's all kinds of other dynamics that typically go in. It's very hard, for example, to tell volunteers, no, you can't do this, right? So the question is, what's the onboarding process for those volunteers, particularly if those are volunteer board members, right? What's the board training that you're doing so that people understand how to do their job in a way that's aligned with everybody else? Right? We see this very much where people seem to understand governance, the word, but don't understand what that means in terms of how the board meeting actually, needs to function. Is it so strictly Robert's Rules of Order that frankly almost nothing gets done? Or is there space within the board meeting to actually have substantive conversations? Right, on whatever the issue of the day is. What's the interaction between the staff and the board, right? In a not-for-profit setting. What's the interaction between the board and the senior leadership team in a corporate um, setting? So I know we're a little bit off the question of the moment, but I think it's important to recognize that the answer is really it depends.
That's fair. I have another question about dynamics and sort of where does the CEO's role begin and end versus us, and how things might play out. Cajoling the quiet ones. Okay, in any group, have the talkers talking and the quiet ones being quiet. That's just who they are and how they always are, right? So in terms of, getting equal participation from everybody, you know, Is it, are we just, letting the situation, not, I don't want to say organically, which is curated. We are making an effort for creating opportunity for everybody, but is it just going to play out the way it's going to play out as people are who they were yesterday, the day before in the organization? Or is it our job to somehow, have the magic words to help these quiet people come out and the talkers sort of give more space? Or does the CEO have to sort of, help manage that also, either before or during?
So it's very helpful for us, as you know, if we knew from the CEO that, gee, so and so is always filled with ideas, but they just don't share them. So they're more of the quieter type, please just keep your eye. So if we got those kinds of hints, that helps and everything. But for me, it always is an interesting dynamic because the reason why the quiet ones don't share is because there's no space for them to share because the talkers are filling up the room. Is that the reason why? Or is the fact that the culture of the organization hasn't been set where people feel comfortable actually, I'm new here. I don't have a C-level title. I'm not on the board. I'm just a volunteer. Like whatever it happens to be and maybe in that particular case, there needs to be some training. From our perspective at the retreat, there's some specific techniques that you've used, Rania, that I've used that actually can make a difference. One of them is to actually it's a silly tactical one, but it's very, very effective. Okay, if we're going to work on some things in small groups or even as a whole group, we can say, okay, here's the question of the day. We'd like to ask everybody to please put down on a piece of paper two ideas on such and such. It gives everyone the time and the space to actually write those ideas. Then if we get them to share the ideas with somebody next to them, there's a mechanism for them to speak. If we have them in small groups, okay, now we're going to do brainstorming. Now that everyone's caught up with a couple ideas, everyone's responsible for sharing their two ideas. So you can go around the room. What are your two ideas? What are your two ideas? What are your two ideas? You could ask people, okay, specifically. For example, you go to somebody who's not one of the big talkers, not one of the quieter ones, so and so. You haven't started us off yet. Can you start us off with one or two ideas? They already have the ideas. You're not putting them on the spot because they've already done the work. They're just mouthing what they've already thought. Then you can go on the quieter ones, or you can go, okay, let's go to the left. And the left person is a very quiet one. Well, guess what? It wasn't so hard. They shared their ideas. Now I can share my ideas. So there's all kinds of facilitative tricks and techniques that we can use to in the moment build up more. Okay, build up more, right? Same thing with respect to very often, if we've got a whole bunch of ideas, we want to figure out how to gain consensus and what to work on as small groups or a team. So we might have a whole bunch of flip charts with ideas that the groups have come up with. We can get people to stick 3 dots or 5 dots on the ones that they think have most merit. They're not talking, they're quiet, but they're thinking. Okay, and this is another way to actually gain their consensus, gain their interactivity, etc. And then you could ask, maybe if everyone's got a different color, you can ask, okay, I see there's some people here that put their dot on such and such an idea, etc. I'd love to hear from some of you who had the yellow dots. Oh, I had the yellow dots, and they can say, this is why I think that's a priority, or this is why it's important, or why we need to focus here, or whatever the thing is. So there's a whole bunch of other ways we can get people to contribute, right? I think there's also, we often do an exercise at the front, which sort of makes the point that if we only listen to the people who have the biggest mouths, we're missing the opportunity to build, excuse me, build um, a synergy and a synergistic output. 1 plus 1 does not equal 2 when you've got a group of people. 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 5. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 12. There's this amazing thing when ideas get bounced around. It's not a zero-sum game. I lose, you win. They're guilty or they're not guilty. No, in this particular case, it's a question of let's build on in order to gain alignment.
Beautiful. Randall, when you think back on our experiences with teams at leadership retreats or your own experiences as the CEO, do you want to share anything come to mind in terms of some like, do's and don'ts, some behaviors that, maybe people should be mindful of or self-aware of or
Um, Yeah, yeah. I mean, some of this is we've already talked about, Um, I think it's one of the things, please don't do this. If there's 15 minutes for you as a CEO to start the day, keep it to 15 minutes. If it's 45 minutes, keep it to 45 minutes. Nobody ever said, boy, I'm so glad that you went less than your allotted time. It's give back that time. So number one, keep the schedule, not because you have to keep to a schedule, but because we want to make sure that there's a certain momentum of energy. And as the CEO starting it off, you're a key part of that. So that's probably one thing. Another is um, try not to influence the direction during the day. Because every time that you open your mouth during the day, everyone thinks, that's the right answer. Oh, we should go in this direction. And if you influence during the day, it's problematic. You will lose the opportunity to collect ideas or for the group to build consensus. You're losing the opportunity to co-create amongst everybody as opposed to having a directional creation from you. There's one exception to that, though. If it turns out that the group is going down a path where you know it's not possible. So, for example, it might mean raising a huge amount of money, or as a not-for-profit, it's beyond the your financial means, or strategically, there's some legal agreements that require you not to do something. Your job as a CEO is to say, hey, listen, I got to make a call here. For reason A, B, C, we absolutely cannot go down that direction. Let's say you've got a partnership with another organization and you've just signed it and it's looking like it's going to make a real difference. And everyone's saying, well, the big future is not that. Okay, but you just made that deal, right? So in this particular case, you don't want to have people waste their time on something that ultimately you're going to have to you or the board will have to say no to. So don't influence the direction except when there's an absolute no-go. And sometimes you can't share the reasons for that no-go, and sometimes you can. But at least that way, the time that they're spending their time on whatever it is will be something that's productive. Here's another not to do. Don't just use your phone or text or computer during the sessions. Certainly for us, when we lead these retreats, we like the idea of it being a digital-free zone, so that people are 100% present. They're interacting with everyone 100%. It's not that most of the people have got their phones kind of, under the desk, busy texting and everything. No, there's very few times when the leadership group can actually, or the board can actually be together. So let's make sure that 100% of the attention is there. And so, write your notes in a notebook. It's not a bad thing to do from time to time, right? So as a CEO, maybe you should do that too. Now, I know for the CEO, you're not participating actively in all the different things. You could bumblebee around just to see what's actually happening. If it's part of the um, big group facilitations where everybody is doing that, well, if you're making notes, you could make notes too. If they're making notes, you could make notes too. But don't get out your phone. Okay. Now, I say that, but we all know that certain calls from the CEO needs to take. So if you know, for example, that you need to have your phone with you because blah, 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 if you're able to share that with the facilitator and or share that with the group so that they know if they see you on the side having to take that critical call, at least that way, they know and you're respecting them for it. So, those are a whole bunch of things that you shouldn't do. Here's a whole bunch of things I think that you should do. And some of these we kind of mentioned before in passing. Get input from the facilitator. Um, Set the direction from the outset, not just in terms of your brief with the retreat facilitation team, us, but also at the very beginning of the day. Um, Listen and observe. We talked about that an awful lot. I think it's very powerful when the CEO at the end of the day, day one, and certainly end of day two, says, my ahas here are such and such, or, here's an insight that I got. And to do that after everybody else has had a chance to share theirs. Um, I think the um, helping set up who's in what group and who's sitting where is actually really, really important. I think scheduling time with a retreat facilitator afterwards is just absolutely huge, absolutely huge. Now, many retreat facilitators, they're now we're done. We're off to the next one. But sitting in their brains and in their notes are all kinds of insights that, as an outsider, you don't really have a chance to actually get so much. So those are some of those things that are just off the top of my mind.
When you were talking about not being on your phone, I wanted to share an idea also that people, it's hard to be mindful of. You're in a new space and you're tired and you're jet lagged or whatever it is. But that idea of being present for the experience and being respectful of what's going on and being mindful of your body language. And we've had CEOs who are, their arms are crossed and it may be that it's cold in the room, but please take 5 minutes to go to your room and get your coat, that you don't look like you're scowling. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you have a toothache, but then also communicate you have a toothache. But the more you can respect, you can give the people in the situation through our body language is very important. If you're not talking all day, you're still talking with your body all day. Believe it or not, we've been going for an hour. So, if there are any questions or observations or comments, Christine, how was it for you?
It was good. Yeah, it was very informative. I enjoyed that.
Anyway, thank you so much, Randall, for the conversation. Thank you for everyone who watched and listened in. If anything we talked about today resonate with you, I'd be happy to have a conversation, share resources. If you want to be invited to these monthly sessions, you can email us at podcast@randallcraig.com and we'll be in touch and we'll see you on LinkedIn and we'll see you next time.